Hello, so my name is Dave Green, and I'll be taking you for comparing cultures. Um, I want to tell you a little bit about the module. Many of us living in Western societies tend to take for granted the way in which we live our lives. We have this mass availability of media, of shopping, of fashion, of clubbing, celebrity culture, personal technologies, even things like the Premier League football and I don't know pot noodles. Although in recent months things like toilet rolls, pasta, and flour seem to be the most desired commodities. And it's really with lockdown, social distancing, the coronavirus. These have recently brought these notions of what we see as normal parts of our life, into sharp relief, into sharp focus. And I think as sociologists, it's also given us some critical distance, a bit of time to begin to understand how our Western world really works. And I think we can see that there was this idea of a government bailout to begin with, and everybody was saying, "Well done." It's unlike the Tories to bail us out in this way. But we can see slowly the operations of capitalism coming back, businesses have to open, ideas of economic growth underpin our lives. Children are being sent back to schools because their parents can't go back to work in other circumstances. So not only have we tended to see these lifestyles as normal and natural, we often make assumptions that the rest of the world is somehow like us. They share, for example, similar values, beliefs, lifestyles, attitude, even experiences. And whilst Western lifestyles and ways of doing things, what we might term byproducts of the capitalist system, are spreading to the furthest corners of the globe. Capitalism has these many tentacles, and historically and now it's become a global phenomenon. Um, as it spreads through the globe, it's this process by which sociologists and other social scientists call globalization. It's far too simplistic to say that other cultures are becoming like us or even want to be us. And we've seen with the debates, very kind of entrenched and sometimes xenophobic debates around Brexit, that's brought these issues into an even sharper focus. And also in recent times, to a certain extent, the protests around discrimination, around different treatment, prejudice of the Black Lives Matter protests have also shown these differences. There is a global diversity of voices and cultures which all require understanding, recognition, and equality. And this module talks very much about these forms of understanding. One of the most shocking events of recent years, and I suppose if we're thinking about the new millennium, the 21st century, the two cataclysmic events, so thus far were 9/11 and 2001, and then the recent coronavirus global pandemic. But if we're thinking about 9/11 and its aftermath, the profound anti-Islamic sentiment, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the terrorist atrocities that we had in places like Manchester Indoor Arena at the Ariana Grande concert, various terrorist acts in London, the 7/7 bombings, for example, attacks in Paris, the attack along the Promenade d'Anglais in Nice, for example. Events such as these demonstrate radically different ways of thinking by the sides involved, but also the ways in which the West views itself as superior. We take sides, we see ourselves as being the good guys, and that's a little bit too simplistic. This is part of the process that social scientists have termed Orientalism, the way by which we treat so-called Eastern societies with prejudice. We often see them as being inferior, as being sensual, as being more primitive, as being less advanced than us. We're in the right, they're in the wrong. Television news footage of these wars, particularly around the Gulf area, and phenomena such as the African famines also demonstrate the fact that people live radically different lives in different parts of the world. Some of you, despite lockdown, might have been travelling or come from or have visited other cultures, and you might have direct experiences of these different lifestyles, and often they are very different. And this, alongside the module material, prompts us to ask really important sociological questions. Are such peoples really more primitive than us? Think of hunter-gatherer societies, for example, indigenous peoples. Are our Western lifestyles really superior? Is science a better way of thinking about the world than magic, myth, or religion? That might seem a strange question, but it's an important one. How can we understand these other cultures? Such issues raise questions about what it is to be human and how do different societies mould our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes and behaviours. How does being part of a culture make us different from people in other cultures? Similarly, other recent catastrophes, things like Hurricane Katrina, the Haitian earthquake, the floods in Pakistan, the Asian tsunami of Boxing Day, and COVID-19, have forced us to rethink relations between the West and other cultures. What we're trying to do on Comparing Cultures is to attempt to examine some of these issues by looking at examples drawn from two similar intertwined disciplines. Obviously, sociology. And there's no one definition of what sociology is, but we can call it the study of social life and social change, the study of social institutions, of societies, and social anthropology, which we could call the comparative study of humanity in different societies. And so this module, as implied by its title, really Comparing Cultures, puts comparison at its heart. An important way of approaching the sorts of issues we've outlined is comparison. Comparative sociology, in particular, is built around two major types of comparison. Firstly, comparisons across time, what we might term historical comparison. We're really asking, how has our own society changed over time? How have we, in the 21st century, why do we have the lifestyles we have? Why do we have the social systems that we have? Why do we have a capitalist society or a postmodern society, whatever you want, the labels you want to use? Secondly, we can talk about cross-cultural comparison. That is, how does our society compare to other societies existing now in the world, especially indigenous societies who are often radically different from ourselves, with very different experiences, beliefs, values, and cultures. Think of someone who is a hunter-gatherer, for example, in the Amazonian rainforest, without the internet, without contemporary Western technologies, without knowledge of Instagram or celebrity lifestyles or the things which we use to orient our own lives. Their lives are fundamentally different. How do we even begin to understand them? And what, indeed, can they say about the West? Looking at the module as an overview, we begin the module by looking at how sociology has developed in a world where the West was coming into close contact with other peoples for the first time in a period of rapid social change. and particularly the way in which this has affected the way in which one still thinks about other cultures today. You know, in the 19th century, in particular, we had a very well established industrial revolution. Things in Europe were changing fundamentally. We were going from a very agricultural society to one which was built around the factory, built around manufacture, these kind of smoky hellholes of the north and of London, belching out products. But it was also a time of colonial expansion. Think of the British Empire. Think of the empires of many other European nations. And the same processes which were driving the Industrial Revolution were all also driving colonial expansion and also driving things like the slave trade. Something we really have to think about studying sociology in Bristol. Some of you might have seen, again, the recent um, images of tearing down the slave trader Edward Colston's statue in the centre of Bristol. We then go on to look at the ways in which different people live in different cultures, examining differences and similarities, and the ways we might seek to research and understand these differences, particularly through methods such as ethnography and visual ethnography. After the break for Christmas, we come back and we discover the ways in which individuals in different cultures think differently by examining the continuing importance of magic, myth, and ritual to their societies, and indeed, in some respects, to our own. Myth, magic, ritual might have been thought to be have gone away with the Enlightenment, with this idea of disenchantment coming from the work of Max Weber, but we still fundamentally are creatures of belief, of habit, of story. The module concludes with a block which looks at the ways in which processes such as colonialism, economic development, and globalization may have harmed indigenous peoples and environments. We could examine the harm done to habitats such as the Amazonian rainforest, the Australian outback, and the southern African deserts, and the impact that global capitalism has had on indigenous peoples who often face a very uncertain future. So what we're doing throughout this module is it begs the question about how different or similar are other peoples at other times and in other places. We're trying to understand culture. You can see the details about the module online on Blackboard in the module handbook. I don't want to say too much there, the details are there. There are two major types of assessment on the module. A group presentation, which would be a virtual presentation using something called PechaKucha, which is a type of PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry too much about that at the moment. And the second assessment will be an individual assignment, a photo autoethnography, a 2,000 word piece, which is illustrated with your own photographs. As again, don't stress too much about that. There'll be plenty of opportunity to talk about assessment during the year. Just to enjoy, orient yourself, get to know the module, the course, the university, the city around you, and above all, try to enjoy your time here. Take care.